Hey everybody, welcome to today's podcast episode. And today I'm talking to Katie Neeves. And Katie and I met really quite recently over LinkedIn Messenger. I think Katie messaged me about my podcast because she saw that I've got a podcast and she wants to delve into that world. So we started chatting over Messenger about podcasts. And as you do, I thought, this woman looks interesting. So I kind of started to check her out a bit. And I found out that she's incredibly interesting. So Katie's a trans ambassador, public speaker, trainer. She's also a photographer. And when I looked at what she does and learned a bit about her story, I thought, I've got to invite her on my podcast. And I said this to her actually when I was thinking about it. It kept coming up for me. And even I thought, I haven't known her very long, but I really want her on my podcast. So I reached out to her and really grateful that she said yes, and thankful that she said yes, because I think she's incredibly inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And just to, I guess, touch on the things that I'm hoping that we're going to get out of today for you listening. So we're going to clear up some of the myths about trans people. We're going to provide, Katie's going to provide, some support, information for trans listeners. I'm sure that you're going to get some really great support and information and ideas and inspiration from Katie. And for allies, and when I talk about allies, just to clarify, I'm talking about straight, heterosexual allies, but I'm also talking about allies from within the LGBTQ plus community, because we can all be allies to each other. So, hi Katie, really good.
Hi Sarah. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
No problem. It's such a pleasure to have you. And can we just start with, I always ask my guests this when I have them on, because it's something I think is important to start getting used to. And that is how you identify and which pronouns you use.
Okay, I identify as a transgender woman, and my pronouns are she and her.
Wonderful. And in terms of sexuality, sexual orientation?
Yeah, I'm a lesbian. So it's something that my sexuality hasn't changed. So with sexuality is completely separate to gender. So I've always been attracted to women. And that's been one constant in my life. So it's one of those things that the labels just changed. So previously I was labeled as a heterosexual man, and I'm now labeled as a lesbian, and I'm completely comfortable with that, and it feels just as it always did do. I didn't invent those labels, but that's what they are. And I'm completely comfortable with them.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've made a whole podcast episode about labels and pronouns and all of that stuff in terms of, when they're useful, when they're not necessarily useful, and do we need them, all of that, and that is a bit of a kind of slightly controversial topic, because we're human beings. So if anyone's listening, you want to check that out, I think it's episode 5. And just to also clarify up front, when we're talking about cisgender or cis people, they are people who identify with the sex they were born at birth. Katie will make sure I've got this right. Yeah. And trans people identify with a different gender to which they were assigned at birth.
Yeah.
I'll say different. I kind of deliberately said different, because it's not necessarily the opposite. Is that right? Because you've got non-binary, or you've got...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Yes, it's not a binary thing. I mean, there's so many people. Well, we're brought up in this binary world, and some boy, girl. Well, it's right from the birth certificate, isn't it? Boy or girl, pink or blue, man, woman. And it's gents, ladies. It's all so binary, and yet nature isn't binary. It's it's a whole spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if we can start with, I think, almost like the story of your businesses. So Katie and I obviously chatted before today, and there's a lots of really useful, interesting, valuable, incredible stuff that we kind of want to touch on. So, and I was sort of thinking about how your businesses have evolved and how you've kind of changed alongside that in a way. So with your photography and then moving into the work you do now, which is photography and the transgender type work as well. So I don't know, that might be a vehicle to you.
Yeah. Would you like me to sort of start back to how I discovered that I was trans, or would you want to just start on the from knowing where I discovered I was trans, and then what I was going to do about it and how it affected my business? How would you like me to take?
I think so I've heard you talk about this a little bit before. I think what I found interesting was when you were married, and you were exploring that sort of, well, the gender identity stuff, I suppose, is how I kind of, when I heard you talk about the fact that you wanted to cross-dress.
Okay, all right.
Kind of like, how you were like just before that, I guess, and then I think that's
okay. So basically, I've always had gender dysphoria, which is a great feeling of unease caused by a mismatch between how I felt in my head and my heart, as opposed to the label I'd been given, and i.e. what was between my legs. And that mismatch is called, say, gender dysphoria, and it's awful. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It's all consuming, really takes you over. But for years, initially I didn't accept that I had that. I mean, I always felt the need to cross dress. I mean, one of my earliest memories, age around 3 or 4, was being caught by my mum trying on a pair of my sister's knickers. And to me, I remember it clearly now, it felt so right. It felt perfect. I felt right. But then my mum caught me and she told me to take them off. And then for every day of the following week, she would get me to pull my shorts. She would pull my shorts down and she would check to make sure I was wearing my own pants. It was humiliating. And so that sowed the seed for life that it was bad, it was naughty, it was dirty. It was not the right thing to do. And so for years, I really struggled with it. And so I didn't accept that at the time, I was a cross-dresser. That was long before I realised that I was trans, and that went on for years. So I would always feel the need to cross-dress. I'd do it, I'd feel great about it, but then as soon as I felt great, then I felt really guilty and I felt really bad, and there was this self-loathing, and it was awful. And then I promised myself that I'd never do it again. And so it was years before I would admit to myself that I was then a cross-dresser, and this vicious cycle just went on right up until my mid-20s. So in my mid-20s, I got married for the first time. I trained to become a press photographer. So I was working, initially on newspapers in Kent, and then I moved up to the Midlands to have a job as a senior staff photographer with the Coventry Telegraph. And that was all going well. But it was only in my mid-20s that's when I finally admitted to myself that at the time, I thought I was a cross-dresser. Because the thing about gender dysphoria is that it can vary in intensity. And some people get it really strongly from a very early age, and other people that want to transition from very young. But for me, it wasn't so strong then. But it can increase over time. And it's very common for it to increase over time. And that's what happened with me.
And do all trans people experience that, the gender dysmorphia?
Dysphoria, not dysmorphia. Dysphoria. Dysphoria is opposite to euphoria.
Is dysmorphia dysmorphia?
Yeah, there's body dysmorphia, and that's when people don't like bits of their body, and that's a completely separate thing, a completely different thing. But it's gender dysphoria. It's opposite.
Okay, they're quite similar, aren't they?
They are, and lots of people get them confused. Yeah, it's a very common.
I've not realised that there's a difference.
No, it's a very common thing to get mixed up. But yeah, not everybody does, but I would say probably the majority do. But it's awful, and you just you just don't feel right, and I remember whenever I did dress up I felt so right. But I just fought it again all these years because I was brought, I mean, I'm 51 now. So I was brought up, I was a kid in the 70s. That even then, like if somebody was gay, that was a scandal then. And it wasn't long before that it was illegal. Yeah. And so, so I was brought up in that culture and nobody spoke about trans issues then. I mean, it's just, it just wasn't a spoken about thing, put it that way.
Shame that you talk about. I think that's something that certainly resonates for me, being gay, and I'm sure a lot of people, in the LGBTQ community, that sort of feeling of being wrong in some way because of all the messaging and all the cultural norms and all of the societal, like you say, your boy girl, your pink blue, and all of that stuff. And the same went for sexuality. You're a woman, you find a nice man and get married, and all of that stuff. It's the story, isn't it? It's like the constant narrative.
Yeah. But even now, when I finally admitted, I'm sort of jumping ahead a bit, but I'll go back again. But even now, when I came out as being trans, several of my friends automatically assumed that my sexuality would change, and all of a sudden I'd be attracted to men, and that's not the case. And it can change with some trans people, but it's not so much in terms of changing, but I think often it's hidden there. It's latent. And as they're able to be their true selves, then that opens the way to allowing them to their sexuality, to their true sexuality, to come out. Whereas for me, certainly so far, it hasn't changed. It's been the one constant in my life.
I think that's important. Definitely, clarification to make. She did say at the beginning, that your gender is absolutely separate to your sexuality.
Yeah, they're not linked at all. That they are completely separate. Yeah. So anyway, so I was married for the first time, and then we were actually married. So to my first wife, we're actually married for 13 years. We should have split sooner because my first wife never accepted my cross-dressing, and some will, some won't, and she was one that just wouldn't. And it was a shame because we worked well as a team, we loved each other, and but eventually it was right to split because she was never going to get used to it, and I really wanted to be myself, and also I wanted to be a parent as well, and she never wanted kids, and I always thought that she would change her mind as she got a bit older, but as I got older, it became more important to me. So there was those two massive things that were against it. So I initiated the first divorce.
Can I ask you a question about the cross-dressing?
Of course.
I'm interested in kind of understanding what that was like. So when would that have been, like 70s, 80s, 90s?
Yes, that would be sort of 80s.
How?
No, yeah, sorry, no, that'd be not. Yeah, hang on, try. Yeah, that'd be 90s.
Let me work it out because there's nowhere I can.
Yeah, 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how that was for you. Having that kind of that need, that natural, natural for you need to kind of express yourself.
Yeah.
Well, things at that time.
Well, when I finally admitted it to myself, because I say many years I didn't, so but it was when I got to my mid-20s and I finally admitted it to myself, it felt like a whole weight lifting off my shoulders. I no longer felt guilty about it. So I had all those years of guilt and self-loathing, and of course that just disappeared overnight as soon as I accepted it myself. And so I realized that I had something called gender dysphoria, and I realized I quantified it. So I thought, well, okay, well, I'm a man who needs to cross-dress, and I treated it as a hobby, but it was something that would always be part of me. But that's how I viewed it, and I was happy like that for many years. And I was totally unprepared for my gender dysphoria to increase dramatically when it did, as it did, and when it did. But it felt
kind of get to that point of acceptance of that. Did you were you looking, was the internet, we had the internet?
No, it wasn't really internet. Or was it internet at the time? I think it might have been, actually. It was, because there were some forums. Because it was the very early days of the internet, and so there there were some forums that I was on. In fact, I was a moderator on one, and I was giving a lot of help to other cross-dressers at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it was very, very early days, but that definitely helped.
The supporting other people often kind of helps us, doesn't it? With our,
Yeah, that definitely.
we're like human, and it's okay, and yeah,
definitely. So that, you know, that all happened, and so I felt a lot better for it then. But then, because my wife never accepted it, her way of coping with it was, well, you do it, but I don't want to see it. So I was just doing it in secret and sort of skulking around and stuff, and it was horrible. It was just, I was living a double life, and it wasn't great. And I would I would sort of go, what I'd do is I started using some local beauty salons, so I got to know the beauty therapist really well, and then we'd go out on girls' nights out, and so what had happened is I'd go over, so I'd go, because my old name was Martin, and I used to go over to a salon, and then I'd get changed there at the salon. They do my makeup, and then I'd go out shopping for the day, and I felt great. It was brilliant. And then I'd go back either to the salon or to often, as I got to know them better, one of their houses, and then get changed for the evening. And then we'd go out and have a girls' night out, and a whole load of us would do it, and it was brilliant. And it was just felt so great to be included as one of the girls, and they were so supportive. They were lovely. They were absolutely brilliant. And that's all I've ever wanted to be. It was just one of the girls. I didn't want to stand out from the crowd and just sort of, all look at me or anything. I just wanted to just be one of the girls and just be accepted. And that's because that's who I really felt I was. But at the time, I still felt that I was a man who needed to cross-dress. And it's funny how several of them now have sort of said they always knew that I was trans, but it wasn't their place to tell me. It was for me to work it out, and it took me years. So I lived for 48 years as a man before the penny dropped. Yeah. And of course, the other thing was with my business, is because what happened is that I left the Coventry Telegraph to set up my own business, and that was what it's about 26 years ago, something like that. It's quite a long time ago. Set up my own business as a freelance photographer and filmmaker, and I named it after my old man name. I called it Martin Neeves Photography and Film. So and I built up this great reputation for myself. I've done all sorts of things. I've done things like I photographed the poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square in 1990. I photographed Princess Diana's funeral. Photographed the Yugoslav civil war in Croatia, and twice been commissioned to photograph the Queen inside Buckingham Palace. So, and done loads of stuff, and still currently ranked second in the UK photographers on Free Index, purely from customer reviews. And so, it's built up this great name for the business and everything, which will be relevant as we go on. So I was doing all of that, but then, as I sort of finally felt that it was the right time to initiate the divorce, because my first wife was never going to accept the real me, as I thought I was then, let alone transitioning, but just as a cross-dresser. So we split, and then we got divorced. And then while I was going through divorce, I'd met another woman who would eventually become my second wife. Although I always said I'd never get married again, because the pain of the first divorce, I always said, I'm never getting married again. And she was fine with just living together. But anyway, we got together, and I decided to tell her about my cross-dressing on our second date. I thought the first date was probably pushing it. Yeah.
Second date.
Hello. Do you come here often? Oh, look, we've got matching knickers. It doesn't really work, does it? So, but to my surprise and to my delight, she was absolutely fine with it, and she sort of said, but there were conditions attached. So she said, as long as you don't dress more than once a week, which in those days I didn't. Once a week was enough to satisfy my gender dysphoria at the level that it was at then. So that was okay. That was one tick in the box. That was fine. And then she said, and also as long as you don't want to transition fully. I said, well, no, I absolutely don't, because at the time, again, I didn't. I was happy as a man who needed to cross-dress, and that was it. That was fine. So I thought, okay, well, let's go for it. And we got together, and the relationship blossomed. And then 9 years ago, we had a beautiful baby daughter who was the absolute center of my universe.
Mm.
And we eventually got around to getting married, but only in 2017, August 2017. So it took us many years, but it took me quite a few years just to get over the pain of the first divorce.
Yeah.
But a few months before we got married, this is in sort of May 2017, I just happened to meet a clairvoyant at a business networking meeting, which was a spiritual healer and clairvoyant. Now, I don't know if you ever do business networking at all, but
You don't meet clairvoyants
you
then?
just don't meet clairvoyants. Yeah,
Well, they don't tell you. Maybe they've got like this, like.
They're all sort of financial advisors. Nothing against financial advisors.
I'll go to them.
I know, and
Sorry, financial advisors, but
exactly, and accountants and lawyers and people like that. They're the sort of people that tend to go. And so I was just fascinated by her, and I was spent most of the evening talking to her, and I was just so intrigued by her that I thought, oh, I'm going to go for a reading. Yeah, and so I did. So I booked up to go for a reading. And she blew me away. She was amazing. She said so many things that are really, really pinpoint accurate things that she couldn't have found out from our website or any other way. And she was just amazing. But she also said lots of things that just didn't make sense at the time. Now, they make perfect sense now, but at the time they didn't. So she said things like a new way of being. She said there's an issue that you've always known about that you're not fully in integrity with. She said, Spirit want you to go off into the countryside and take yourself off for a long walk and talk to yourself, talk to nature, and talk to Spirit, and they will show you what you need to see. I thought, well, all right. Well, I like walking anyway. What the hell? But I was quite busy at the time because I was busy with my work, and it was the run up to to our wedding and everything. So it took quite a few months before I found the time to do it. So in the meantime, we had a wedding. We had a lovely wedding. It was great. But then it was actually in early November 2017 when we actually when I actually found the time to go out on this long walk. And I went over to Rutland Water, and it's the smallest county of England, Rutland, near Leicestershire. Gorgeous countryside over there. I love it there. And I worked out this route around the surrounding countryside, because around the actual reservoir itself gets quite busy with people. And I went midweek as well because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anybody else. I wanted to be on my own. And I remember it now. It was a beautiful day. It was a blue sky. The sun was shining. It was a cold,
you want Spirit to come, don't you? You
yeah.
don't want anyone else there.
It was a cold, crisp, clear day. It was a beautiful day. And I remember now, I went off with my map and my compass and my walking boots, and I was on a mission. I was stomping it out. I was walking really fast, and it was a really long route that I'd worked out as well. It was a long walk. And I was talking at the top of my voice, talking to myself, talking to Spirit, whoever they were, and to the countryside. And I remember feeling disappointed at the time because I naively expected some sort of light bulb moment or some sort of voice as if to say, this is what you should be seeing. Strangely, that didn't happen. Can't understand why. And I thought, oh, perhaps I've done it wrong. Perhaps I should have just sat serenely by the water's edge, just looking out to the reservoir. And but weirdly, I don't know whether it's coincidence or what, but around the same time, my gender dysphoria increased dramatically. It went through the roof. I so much so that I just didn't know what gender I was at all. It's horrendous, and I was so confused about it. I was even typing into Google, what gender is Martin Neeves? Now I know that's completely bonkers, because it could only come from, the answer could only come from me. But I was so desperate for information that that's the sort of thing that it drives you to do. Yeah. But the trouble is, I couldn't tell my wife about my inner turmoil because she would. Well, I didn't want to stir up a hornet's nest unnecessarily if it was something of nothing, but also, it would lead her to ask me questions which at the time I just didn't have the answers to because I just didn't know what gender I was. So I had to work this out for myself. So I thought, okay, I've got to face this on my own. So what am I going to do? So the first thing I did was I got some counselling. So I found a counsellor in Coventry who'd got experience of dealing with people with gender issues.
Right.
She was great. She was really good. And we had several sessions. But at the end of those sessions, I wrongly concluded that I was gender fluid. Now I know why that was. It was because it was my fear that was stopping me from admitting to myself that I was a trans woman, and it was making me hang on to any bit of masculinity that I had. So that was the sort of first conclusion. But then while I was doing that, I was also working my way through a self-help workbook, which was written by a gender therapist from the States called Dara Hoffman Fox, and it's a book about how to identify your gender identity, you know, for people who are questioning. It's an absolutely brilliant book. It's just like psychotherapy in a book, really. And it took me about 2 months to work my way through it. So there's a lot of work involved. But when I got to about 3/4 of the way through the book, it became obvious that I wasn't gender fluid. I was, in fact, a transgender woman. And then by the time I got to the end of the book, that conclusion hadn't changed. So now I had 2 conclusions, but they were different. So I thought, what am I going to do now? So I decided to send a text back to the clairvoyant. It's important to point out she's not just some sort of mystic Meg sitting in a caravan with a crystal ball predicting the lottery numbers, although that'd be quite handy at the moment. So if you know any that are like that, tell me about that, because that'd be quite good. But no, she's actually a spiritual healer, and she's a healer member of the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, which is recognised by the NHS. So she's got some credibility behind her.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was just something I thought was interesting about the story of how you met her.
Yeah.
Because despite our jokes, which I think is what you're saying now, you're starting to get into now, you know, I totally believe in, you know, energetic alignment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, so much beyond us that, you know, and I'm also, you know, working quite a holistic way with my clients. So what I found interesting was, you know, you going for the walk and like waiting for the big, like booming voice to tell you the answer. But really, you got the answer, didn't you? But in a kind of very different way. And I think it often happens so unexpected. Because
in a way I wasn't expecting. Completely.
I can't do this anymore. You know, I can't live like this anymore. It's just too painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
then that took you on this sort of journey, carrying on, which was like, maybe I'm gender fluid. That was like almost like the next step of the really
it just started me questioning. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, so I texted the clairvoyant, and then she suggested that I go to see her for what she calls a vision quest session, which is a 4-hour interactive process. It's a big old process. And so what she does, she uses techniques such as deep meditation to get you into a really relaxed state, to allow you to get past all your fears and to access your inner truth. So I did that. I did that on the 11th of January 2018. I can remember all these dates vividly. Very important date to me, that is. And so I went along there and did that. And it was such an emotional session. I cried buckets that day. I really did. And it was at the end of that session. And then, in fact, actually, I should say that during that session, she didn't give me any answers at all. Very important. She just asked me loads of questions. It was question after question after question. Whether she got the questions from spirit, I don't know. Haven't got a clue. But she just asked me all these questions, and she just allowed all the answers to come from me and from my inner truth. And it was at the end of that session that I admitted to myself that I am a transgender woman and that I need to change my body. And that was the day that I felt that Martin had stepped back and allowed Katie to take over. I really does that is the exact day that I felt that I really felt female from then on, and I haven't looked back since. Because now I knew my true gender identity, but then what was I going to do with this piece of information? Because there's one thing knowing it, there's another thing doing something about it. And I mean, could I go back to living how I was before, but with this new piece of information eating away at me? I mean, I had a happy home life. I had a successful business. I didn't want to be trans, because I knew that was going to throw a massive spanner in the works of both my business and my home life, in my marriage and everything. And I didn't. Nobody wants to be trans. Nobody chooses to be trans. But I discovered this thing about myself.
Yeah,
But
wow.
but things the research I did showed that most trans people who decide to transition, because that was the choice. There was no choice about being trans. The only choice was whether I did anything about it. But most people who decide to transition, usually after the initial loss, pain, and heartache, and there's a lot of it, and it's quite a bumpy journey, or very bumpy journey, but usually then end up to lead happy and contented lives. Whereas most trans people who decide not to and then decide to live their lives for other people, they're the ones that often end up in a spiral of depression, because they're not allowing themselves to live their truths, and it eats away at them, and it's sad to see it, but I see it a lot, And so the urge to live my truth was just so unbelievably strong, and so I just thought, well, I've just got to do this. I've got to face it head on. I would say man up, but that's probably the wrong thing to say, isn't it?
So just to clarify, like where you got to. So there was no question that you're trans,
No.
right, at that time.
No.
And when you talk about transitioning, what is transitioning? So what forms can it take? Because my understanding is that some people, and there's we're talking about, there's medical transition, and then there's other types of transition which aren't medical. I guess
Social.
that's, yeah. So perhaps if you could just sort of maybe help us and me and the listeners sort of understand the different
Absolutely.
sort of choices that trans people might make when they realise that.
Absolutely. Well, the whole purpose of transition is to alleviate the effects of gender dysphoria. And because gender dysphoria can vary in its strength, then so does the transition. So that's basically a transition. You match the transition to however you feel. So everybody's different, and we've all got a different journey, and everybody's valid. So it does. So there are lots of different steps along the way that you can take to a full medical transition, and some people take all those steps, and some people don't. Some people can't, for various medical reasons. They can't, and so they have to compromise somewhere. But they find something a place that's comfortable for them, and so it may just be social transitioning, where they're just living full time as in their desired gender, and dressing in their desired gender, but doesn't make them cross dressers. They're fully integrated into society. They're living like that all the time, and they change their names. I mean, obviously, it's much more difficult for people who obviously if they're non-binary, obviously then in terms of the gender spectrum, they're more about in the center of that, in the middle of that, and so obviously society is geared up against non-binary people. It's so much harder for them. For me, I'm much more of a binary transition, although most people have never had to look at where they sit on the gender spectrum. And obviously I have, because of the work that I've done. And I think I'm probably about 70% female, 30% male, I think, on the gender spectrum. And I'm completely comfortable with that. But it was still obviously majority female. And so it was absolutely right for me to transition. But for non-binary people, they're more in the center. So it's much harder for them. And society, they want to put these labels on you.
I think what's coming into my head is and that, I don't know if I'm gonna get this quite right in terms of language and stuff, but there's something about, it's like regardless of how you present, i.e. what you look like, what clothes you wear, anything else about you, that is irrelevant in a way. What we need to understand and respect about people is how their gender, how they identify, and their gender that they are. That's not up for debate. That's not up for question, regardless of what you look like, what you what you wear, and all of that stuff.
Exactly, because there's gender expression, and so that's how they express their gender. And so some people might feel one way, but then they just express it in a different way, and that's completely up to them. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's just getting to the point where society accepts people for who they are, and that's, people are just people, and let them get on with it.
Because I know that this is a really the way that you said Martin stepped away and allowed, gave space for Katie to come forward, sort of thing, and that relationship that you have with yourself, and how you see that. But I also am aware that not all trans people
no
I think it's a really important thing for non-trans people to understand this relationship.
Absolutely. I'm quite unusual in the trans world. Not many trans people will dead name themselves right at the start of an interview like I did. Now, it's for me.
What do you mean by dead name, please?
Yeah, okay. Well, I always call it my old name. I never refer to Martin as my dead name. I refer to Martin as my old name. But I've done a lot of work actually with the clairvoyant and spiritual healer. She's been absolutely amazing. She's done so much work with me. And so she is the reason that I credit myself, or credit her actually, for me being so comfortable with my past. I'm completely at peace with Martin. Martin will always be a part of me, and I'm grateful to Martin for making me the person I am today, and for stepping back and allowing me to be Katie. So, and Martin will always be in my heart, so he's always with me. So I'm completely at peace with Martin, but I know that most trans people aren't, and they haven't had that help. And so I think it's very important for cisgender people, so non-trans people, to recognize that, and that it's very hurtful to be referring to somebody's old name unless they give you permission to. I mean, obviously you've got permission to from me, because I said it in the first place right at the start, and you knew that anyway. So, and I'm very open about it, and I'm completely comfortable with it. But yeah, you're absolutely right to bring that up, that most trans people, they like to sort of bury the past. But I'm lucky that I'm comfortable with Martin.
I think it's also having that awareness of, especially if you have people in your life who are transitioning, or who are going through that sort of thought process, to be really sensitive to it, and it might mean just pausing before you speak, or but it's important to really think about it and respect it and recognize.
It's the same as pronouns as well. And I know it's hard for people if they've known somebody and used certain pronouns for years, and then having to get used to new pronouns. It is difficult. I mean, and it's important to point out that it wasn't just me it's not just me that's it's in transition. It's my loved ones as well. So they're all in going through their own transition with this, and so they don't get it straight away. They're not going to. I think they need understanding from both sides, to be honest, because the trans person wants to be known in their new gender, and with their not the new gender, the real gender, not the new gender, the real gender, but their new pronouns. They want to be known as that straight away, and you can get quite impatient at that and quite frustrated when people don't get it. But it takes people a while to do it. But I found that the people who are supportive and the people who try, and even the people that try sometimes slip up. But I found personally that people like that, when they slip up, it's not a problem for me, because I know that they are supportive, and they've just known me for years. That they might have known me for 30 years or whatever as Martin, and they're saying he and him, and so if they slip up like that, if they just sort of say "oops, sorry," and then just carry on, that's absolutely fine. But just don't make a big deal of it. But it's the ones that sort of deliberately misgender you and use your old pronouns deliberately, then that's abuse, and obviously that's got to be stopped, definitely. But I think there needs to be a little bit of give and take from both sides, really.
Mm. So we got to the point where you had text the clairvoyant.
Yes, yeah. So I got this.
Took you off track a bit there.
Yeah, that's all right. Don't worry. Yeah. So I'd had this vision quest session, and I'd admitted to myself that I am a transgender woman, and I realised, yeah, I've got to do this thing. So the first thing I had to do was to tell my wife, and I don't mind admitting that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. Especially as we hadn't been married long. I mean, this was well, it was in January, say 11th of January 2018, when I finally admitted to myself this, but we only got married the previous August, and it took me a month to pluck up courage to tell her. So it was in February that I told her, and it went down as badly as you would expect. And we tried going for counselling, but it unfortunately didn't work. The problem was that although I was still attracted to women, and the label had changed for me, the label hadn't changed for her. So she was still attracted to men, and so there was obviously an incompatibility there. And although she loved me for who I was, obviously a big part of it was her attraction to me as a man. And so I totally understand and respect why it wouldn't work for her. So unfortunately, that meant the end of marriage number 2. So that was a very short marriage. But then the next issue I had was, what was I going to do about the name of my business when I changed my name to Katie? Because my business was very strongly branded and named after my old male name. It's Martin Neeves Photography and Film. And I don't know if you've seen the branding for it, but it's massive letters on there saying Martin Neeves. It's huge. So I thought, well, I could change the name of it to Katie Neeves Photography and Film. But then the trouble is, at that stage, it'd been an established brand for 22 years or something, and I'd got all these great reviews and ranked really highly and done all these things and everything very well known. And I just thought, if I changed the name to Katie Neeves Photography and Film, it'd be like starting from scratch and nobody would know me. And I thought, I just couldn't do it. So I thought, well, I've just got to come out very openly, very honestly, and very publicly as being trans, and continue to do that, and just keep the name of the business the same. And so what I decided to do was to make a coming out video, which I don't know if you've seen. It's on my website. It's on the About Me page.
I haven't, actually.
Yeah, if you look on the About Me page of my website, it's on there. If you scroll down, you'll see it. Yeah, so you'll see how I used to look as Martin.
I'm going to put anything that we're talking about. The links will.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah.
So other people can.
Yeah. And so I made this video and I sent it out to all my clients and I put it on all my social media. And I remember now my finger nervously hovering over the mouse, knowing that as soon as I make that click, my life will never be the same again. It was awful. I was so frightened of the reaction, because my whole livelihood, my reputation, everything lay on the reaction to that one video. Anyway, I made the click and I waited. But then I had to go out on a job, and I did, and I went and did this job. My mind wasn't on the job at all. I mean, I took the pictures as quickly as I could. I mean, the client was really happy with the pictures, but I just couldn't wait to get back just to see what was happening on Facebook, and because Facebook was the first one I put it on. But I needn't have been worried, because when I got back, I was just inundated with literally hundreds of messages of support. It was amazing. I felt so loved. It was incredible. And it went from being something that I was absolutely dreading to being one of the most uplifting experiences of my life, second only to the birth of my daughter. It was right up there. Amazing. And I didn't do any work for 3 whole days because I was so busy replying to all these lovely messages. It was incredible.
Well, it reminds me, actually, there's 2 things that I was thinking when you were talking there about that. And one is beginning of last summer, I posted on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn, I suppose, is kind of the platform of all the social medias where it represents my corporate life. And so although I was kind of a bit out at work, even up to my last job, I wouldn't say I was fully myself at work in terms of my sexuality. Few people knew, but it was kind of, one person in my team I know, didn't know probably until very soon before I left, because I told her she found out I'd been to an LGBT networking event. She was like, oh, like that. And I suppose in some respects, I sort of hope people would just sort of find out organically, so I didn't have to tell them, but that was quite an interesting kind of like, oh, right, I'd be different today, but anyway, that was back then.
It's awful when you can't. It's awful when you can't be yourself at work, though, because you're constantly. You just in things like talking about what you did on the weekend. You can't say about you taking your partner, whatever, and talking about your partner and talking about her name and everything. It's awful having to suppress it.
Yeah, I mean, I've written about this, and I'd make my podcast. One of my podcasts I've made is about being a late in life lesbian, and that's part. I talk a bit about my story in there as well. But what was I saying? Yeah, so last summer I put this post on LinkedIn of me at Pride with a massive rainbow flag, and I was like a little bit like what you're talking. What's going to happen, but I decided that I wanted to work specifically with LGBTQ plus women in my business, and that was who I was going to be, that was who I was going to represent, and that meant no more kind of like being a bit in the shadows and filtering myself. And I didn't possibly get the amount of response you got, but it got the most likes on any post that I've ever put on LinkedIn. And I think even now it's sort of, I think I've got it's probably not a massive number, but it was over 1,000. It was like 100 or something. And normally I get like about 200 if I'm lucky. So it was like massive, and I was like, wow, so yeah, kind of that's funny that it resonated with me what you were saying about your experience, but also the other thing about your business name. When I heard you talking about this before, I thought it's almost like if it wasn't a name of a person, like it could be Google or something. I know it's not Google, but that's what it's almost like, although it's interesting, like, and then I thought, well, when you think about it like that, it doesn't matter, does it? It's like,
exactly. And that's it. And I've just effectively just separated myself from the business name. So instead of being Martin from Martin Neeves Photography and Film, I'm just Katie from Martin Neeves Photography and Film. And that's it. It's just that I think it would be easier if there were lots of people in that business, but because it's just me in that business, it makes it a bit harder because people know that it's just me and I'm a one-person business.
Sure.
But
I don't know.
Well, the thing is that I'm so out and out and proud that it doesn't matter. That it's part of my story. It's who I am. It's the real me. And
so you pressed the button and got all the wonderful support.
Yeah. Sorry, got sidetracked there. Yeah, so I got so I got all this amazing support, and I had and I started getting all these lovely messages from friends and from clients. But then I also got messages from other trans people who said that they'd been struggling with it, and they said that what I said had really helped them, and that was great. And then my coming out video was so unusual that it got picked up in the local media. It was initially the local radio, so started doing some interviews for local radio, and then it was some local newspapers, and then what happened was I had a message come through, because every time I did an interview, then I'd get messages through from other trans people saying that I'd really helped them with what I'd said, and that really spurred me on. There was one particular message that really, really struck a chord with me, and it was a lady whose son had gender issues when he was going through puberty, and he was being treated for it at a gender clinic for kids. And she said that she was so worried at the time that he would either be bullied or he'd self-harm or attempt suicide, as so many do. I mean, the stats are just horrific.
Mm.
I mean, the Stonewall Trans Mental Health Survey of 2012 showed that 48% of trans people have attempted suicide at least once, and 84% have thought about it.
Mm.
And I'm surprised those stats aren't higher, because most of my trans friends have attempted. I'm very lucky; I never have. But yeah. So, and it really got me thinking. And she said, if only there was someone like you out there at the time he was going through it, just to let him know that it's okay to be trans, because it
Mm.
is. um,
Yeah.
and to and I thought, yeah, I've really got to do some good with this. And so I thought, well, I'm going to carry on. I'm going to vlog my whole journey and bring people along on the journey, and demystify the whole process, just to show people that trans people are just ordinary people who want to be safe, loved, and happy, just like everyone else. And so that's my whole mission. And so and then, and the media stuff sort of escalated. Then I started doing stuff for national radio and television and national newspapers and magazines as well. And so all of a sudden I've become this trans ambassador. And so then I formed Cool to Be Trans, just to do that, to do trans awareness training and public speaking and media appearances, just to get that message across, that trans people are just ordinary people, and just to
Yeah.
educate people about it.
Wow.
And I think my whole ethos is to entertain as well as inform. So I use a lot of humor in my presentations and media appearances, because I think it's important to entertain people, because it people then listen to what you've got to say, and they'll remember it. And you've got to, if you don't entertain them, they'll just switch off.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
important.
So true. And I love how you, yeah, I guess what's coming up for me is like, it's always been your mission.
Yeah, yeah. It feels so
And
right to be
now
in
it's
it.
like you've discovered it. You've discovered you, and you've discovered this really incredible, powerful mission that you have in the world.
It just feels so right. It really is. And I am so passionate about it. And now, even though I'm still running Martin Neeves Photography and Film,
Yeah.
I bet you've never seen me to put any social media things on about it. It's all the trans stuff that I put out there now. And although when I do a photography or a video job, I am passionate about the quality,
Yeah.
and I do the best I can, absolutely.
Oh,
But I just don't promote that anymore. So I'm promoting Cool to Be Trans, and just, that is my thing. That, and to be honest, I think there's such a need for it, and I know that it's doing good. And I very often get trans people contact me for a bit of support, just because I'm getting reasonably high profile in the trans world now because of the work that I'm doing, and
yeah.
they contact with me, and I know that I am helping people just through that. And often they just need a little bit of hand holding at the start, just to sort of, they almost need permission to admit to themselves that they're trans, because so often they'll come to me in a state of self-denial, because
Yeah.
they don't want to be trans. It's not who they are. They don't want to be trans, and I didn't want to be trans.
No, just like, people don't want to be gay, really.
No,
Why would you want to go through all of that?
exactly, you just don't, do you? It's a lot easier if you're not, but it's who you are. But once you
I do
actually,
actually quite love it though now. I actually love
yeah.
being a lesbian. I have to be
Oh,
honest. Yeah, I do, because
oh,
it's,
I do. Oh, I absolutely love being trans and being a lesbian. Absolutely, it's me, and it's my truth. And oh
yeah.
God, yeah. Oh, I'm full on that. Yeah, absolutely love it. Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say actually that what you're doing now is literally saving lives, helping to save lives by,
Yeah,
supporting those people.
it is. I mean, there's one person I was supporting, and she actually attempted suicide while I was supporting her, and that was just, I was supporting her via Facebook Messenger, and I just sort of said to her, please, let me help you. Just please give me your address so I can get an ambulance to you. And she said, no, it's too late now. I don't want the bleeding to stop. And as soon as she said that, I thought, oh God, it's so urgent. And she said bleeding. And I actually phoned the police at that point, and there was enough information that she'd given me, and that she'd already put on her
Okay.
profile page, that was enough for the police to be able to track her down. And they actually got somebody to her, and they saved her. it shook me up because it could have gone the other way. Yeah, but it's yeah, that was pretty heavy. But I mean, that luckily that doesn't happen very often. I mean, more often than not, it's a case of just helping people to accept who they are, and then you see them blossom, and it's just a beautiful thing to see. It really is. When you see, it's a bit of hand holding, and
Yeah.
then they just become themselves, and you see how much happier they look. And I've lost count of a number of people who have told me that I look so much happier now, and I'm not surprised, because it's the real me.
Yeah.
And when you're living your truth, good things happen, and
Yeah.
you know, you're
It emanates out of you, doesn't it? It's just
yeah.
energy of, yeah, of trusting in yourself, and yeah, knowing that you don't need to, just be yourself, and everything is all you need, really. It's
Yeah,
all you
and
need.
I think fear often stops you doing things that you really should be doing for your own good, and it could have easily have stopped me from admitting to myself that I was trying, or actually doing something about it. But um, I think certainly I found that fear is often a lot worse than the reality of it. And it's like when we're coming out, you know, I was so fearful of it, but actually the actuality of it, it was amazing. It was one of the best moments of my life, as it turned out. But I
Yeah.
didn't know that before.
um, I want to ask you. I want to ask you about the Gender Recognition Act.
Okay.
Uh,
What's happened is that there's a very strong anti-transgender lobby, and it's getting stronger. And they're only a minority in this country, but they are very noisy, and they've got quite a few friends in high places. But what's happened over the last few years? The Gender Recognition Act 2004 is the piece of legislation that governs how you're actually given a gender recognition certificate, and that is the piece of paper that sort of legally recognises you as in your gender. So initially, you know, when we're born, we're given a birth certificate, but that's obviously based just on your sex, you know, on your sex characteristics, your physical sex characteristics. And of course, as we know, that's often wrong. But you're given that until you do something about it and just have this gender recognition certificate. Now, the vast majority of trans people don't bother with the gender recognition certificate because it's expensive and it's humiliating to do, and it's you know, you can do so much without it anyway. I mean, it's been enforced since 2004, and to date, I think they've only issued about 5,000 or 6,000. It's hard. It's tiny, absolutely tiny, the amounts that I have. So you know, this piece of.
I mean, what are the benefits of having?
Okay. Well, if I tell you what you can do without it, so without it, and like already, so I haven't got a gender recognition certificate. I don't qualify for one yet, because you have to be living full time in your desired gender for 2 years, and I'm not yet. So I've been living in my desired gender for well, it's just under 2 years. So I'm not quite there yet
That's one of the hoops that you have to. Like,
oh, absolutely. But say without it, as already I've got female medical record, I've got female passport, female driving license. So they're the things that you tend to sort of use anyway. So you don't really, in terms of the gender recognition certificate, what that allows you to do, it allows you to change your birth certificate. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, I don't even know where my birth certificate is. It's something you never use. But the thing is that when you die, on your death certificate has to match your birth certificate. So if it bothers you that when you die that it says your true gender on your death certificate, then you'll want a gender recognition certificate, because you can't do it without it. My attitude towards that is, well, I'll be dead anyway, so it won't matter. So that doesn't bother me. Another thing is that if you want to marry again in your true gender, then you need a gender recognition certificate, because otherwise, if I was to get married again, I've got no plans for it. I think twice is enough. But if I were to,
yeah,
then I think I would want a gender recognition certificate, because I would want it going down as female. I wouldn't want it going down as male on a marriage certificate. And then the other thing was that if I was a particularly naughty girl and was sent to prison, then having a gender recognition certificate would guarantee that I would get sent to a female prison, a women's prison, rather than a men's prison. Although that's not so strict these days, because I think the prison authorities are looking more favourably on trans people who haven't got gender recognition certificates, so they appreciate the problem. So that's not so cut and sewn. Although I do actually know the longest serving trans prisoner in the UK, who she's female, and she spent 30 years in prison, in a men's prison, and some of the stuff that happened to her, absolutely horrific. It's awful what happened to her, but yeah, it's really, really bad. Yeah, so that's what a gender recognition certificate allows you to do. But say I've got no intention of going to prison, I've got no intention of marrying again, and say when I'm dead, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? So for me, so
one of the things, it's about the principle as well.
I think it is. But at the moment, the criteria say
respect,
absolutely. But certainly, at the moment, the criteria for having a gender recognition certificate is that you have to be living in your desired gender for 2 years, which I haven't yet, so I don't qualify for that yet. You have to have been diagnosed for having gender dysphoria, which I have. So I've been diagnosed with a psychiatrist, which again, you shouldn't have to really, because gender dysphoria and being trans is no longer classed as a mental illness. It used to be, but the World Health Authority declassified it only last year. Actually, it was very recent. But they used to classify being homosexual as being a mental illness. Now it's unthinkable to think of that now, but they used to. So it just shows how things have come on, but they've been quite slow to catch up. But they have now, and at least they're not classified. But you still have to have this diagnosis from a psychotherapist to say that you are. But I have got that. And then you have to pay them some money, and you have to provide proof that you've been living in your desired gender by showing them all. You've changed your name and all this, and that you've been living full time. So you have to provide this proof. But then you have to provide all this to a panel of people who you will never meet, and they are the people that decide on your gender. They've never met you, but all they have is this stuff that's in front of them. But if you don't like their conclusion, you have no way of appealing, no way of appeal at all, no right. And I just think that's so completely wrong. Every other decision like that, you would have a right of appeal, but you don't with this, and that's it. And so the whole system is completely wrong, And so
what's been in place since 2004.
Absolutely, 2004.
And so reviewed, but it seems to be a bit stuck from what I can gather.
Yeah, so in the last couple of years, so the government were looking at reviewing it, and Theresa May, when she was Prime Minister, she announced this, there was going to be a review, and that she'd do a survey to ask people what they their views about all this, and it wasn't just trans people that answered the survey; it was cisgender people who answered the survey as well. And so a lot of the anti-trans campaigners did answer that, and the results of that should have been published a long time ago. I think over a year ago it should have been published, but they haven't been. The government have been delaying it. But just recently there was a report in the Sunday Times saying that it was basically as a leaked report, really, just sort of saying that the results will be announced. I think the end of July. I think they said it was going to be announced. Will be announced soon. And what they were saying is that 70% of the people who responded to the survey were in favour of reform of the Act to make it easier. So for self-identification, to save all this having to go to a panel on it.
That's the reform.
That's the reform. So that's what it's about. Yeah. and really, whether you have a gender recognition certificate only affects you and your partner, really. That's all. That it doesn't affect anybody else, and it doesn't affect access to female-only spaces or anything like that. It's purely a paperwork exercise. That's all it's about. But it's sort of been taken over by the anti-trans lobby, and so they've turned it into
like risen to the surface, all that stuff about
that has. And so what's happened is that they've now made it about something that it wasn't about, and they've now encroached onto the Equality Act 2010, which is something completely different, and which wasn't up for review, and as far as I know isn't up for review, but they've sort of made it up for review. And so they've now, so 70% of the people that responded said that they were supportive of trans rights. They wanted to make it easier for trans people to get a gender recognition certificate. However, the government, certainly in this leaked report, are saying that they're not going to reform the Act, but as a sort of bit of compensation, they're going to make it illegal to have what was, I've forgotten the name of the term. It was the conversion therapy. That was what it was, because that is still legal. Wow, that is still legal in this country. Shockingly, it shouldn't be. That should have been legal a long time ago. Yeah, and that's still going on for gay people and for trans people.
I know it's going on, but
particularly the religious religious fundamentalists tend to sort of be the ones that advocate for that. So and that's a good thing that they're going to stop that, but that should have been stopped anyway. But that was nothing to do with the GRA or anything. But they're saying they're not going to reform the Act. But then they've been sort of hoodwinked and sidetracked, and then they started talking about access to female-only spaces, and they're saying that they're going to protect female-only spaces. But protect them from what? They're trying to sort of make a link between trans people and attacks on cisgender women in female-only spaces, but there haven't been any. There have been absolutely no reported cases of attacks on cisgendered women in female-only spaces. There've been plenty of attacks on trans women by cisgender women in female-only spaces. Loads of those. That happens on a regular basis, but there've been none the other way around. And if there had have been, you can bet that the anti-trans lobby would be shouting it from the rooftops. But there's been none. But they're trying to make this link, and they're saying they're protecting female-only spaces. Well,
I'm like a story, a narrative that's true.
Now, I'm all for protecting female-only spaces if that's inclusive of trans women. But by the sounds of it that's coming through, it's sounding as if it's going to be exclusive of trans women. And they're saying that the access to female-only spaces is going to be dependent on genitalia. Now, there lies a problem.
How are they going to know what your
genitalia is? How are they going to? Who's going to police it? Are you going to be expected to flash your bits to a toilet attendant just to go to you before you use the loos? Well, that's not going to happen, isn't it?
Mad.
So then it's going to go down to looks. Well, the thing is that you can't tell by looks because there are plenty of very masculine-looking cisgender women. And as what happened is that in the States, in North Carolina in 2018, I think it was, a similar act came in, and what happened is they found that there was an increase of attacks on both trans women, but also cisgender women who happened to look more masculine, who had more masculine haircuts or more masculine clothes. Mm-hmm. And so what happened is that a federal judge ended up throwing the law out and just said it's just completely dangerous and unworkable. But this is what they're planning to bring in. It'd be completely unworkable. And the thing is that they haven't really thought it through, because if it's down to genitalia, then a lot of trans men who present totally as men, and you would never know that they were trans. They've got beards, deep voices, and everything. Yeah. They would, if they followed the letter of the law, then they would be forced to use the ladies' loos. Well, I would have thought that would make some of these anti-trans campaigners a lot more uneasy than trans women going there. And the thing is that with many as we discussed with transition, you don't, not all trans women have lower surgery or upper surgery or any surgery. Many do, many don't. And it's completely up to them, and it's anybody else's business whether they do or not. So I can't see the relevance of that. But the thing is that if they have still got male genitalia, why should they be excluded from using the ladies' loos? In any case, the whole idea of gendered toilets is just crazy and out of date anyway. Because where do non-binary people go? Non-binary people I've got lots of non-binary friends, and they tell me, well, you can, they don't feel right going to the gents, they don't feel right going to the ladies. Where do they go? They don't want to use disabled loos because they don't want to stop a disabled person from using the loo if they need to use it urgently. Well, where do they go?
Am I right in thinking as well that although they're saying, there's this argument about female spaces, there's no alternative. They haven't actually offered, or no one's talking about, well, where would you go then?
No, and also, I would be, even if they'd sort of said, oh, okay, well, everywhere has to create another toilet that's for trans people. Would that be like this is the subhuman toilet, folks?
Yeah, it's separation, isn't it? And
awful
discrimination and prejudice, division.
Women
more, more sort of harm, definitely creating more harm, but also more separation and more kind of stories in people's heads around why.
But it's crazy. I mean, I'm a woman, you're a woman, you're cisgender, I'm trans, but we're both women. We both fall under that same umbrella of women, and it should just be inclusive. It's just, what's the problem? And also, in the women's loos, it's all in cubicles anyway, so it's not. It's all private. The only public bit is where you wash your hands. What's the big deal?
There's no deal. There's nothing.
There is no deal. But there's a big trans rights.
Maybe is someone trying to? I made a bit of a rude sign with my hand there. Maybe that's quite apt.
I think it was.
Trying to distract us, with all this shit, basically.
Yeah.
They're not getting the act passed, are they?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So they're just diverting it, really. So there's a big fight on at the moment for trans rights, and so there's rallies and protests all over the country at the moment, and people writing to MPs and to Boris Johnson and to Liz Truss, the Minister for Women and Equalities. And so she hinted at this recently when she said about it before the leaked report in the Sunday Times. She made a speech about it, and so that was when alarm bells were sent ringing, to be honest. And I'm actually quite surprised that she's got in the job that she is, to be honest, considering she voted against same-sex marriage twice. Women for the Minister for Equalities. Yeah. Doesn't really compute, does it?
No, does not compute.
But I'm certainly encouraging as many people as possible to write to their MPs to educate them, because I think there's a lack of knowledge about this, about what it is and what it isn't, and sooner or later it will be debated in Parliament, and I want all the MPs to be fully genned up on the knowledge. I mean, write to them, give them my details. I'm more than happy to talk to them. I'll talk to as many MPs as you like. So even if you don't want to, you don't feel like talking to them, say, I'll set up a Zoom call with them. I'll talk to as many. I don't mind, because I'd like to be able to give them the facts so that they can see exactly what it is to be trans and what it isn't, and that there's nothing to fear from being trans, and there's nothing to fear from trans women using female spaces. There really isn't. Yeah. I mean, I wrote to my MP, and then I got this ridiculous reply back. It took a while before I got the reply, but this reply that came back. He obviously hadn't read what I'd said, and I'd sort of outlined all these different points that we've just discussed, and he hadn't read it at all. And then he started going on about restricting access to trans medical health care for trans children as well. And I thought, well, again, that's not in the GRA either. It's in there about when they can legally recognise their gender, but nothing about access to trans medical healthcare. So that's a worrying aspect as well, if that's included, because access to trans medical health care for children is hard enough as it is. I mean, we all face, as adults as well, we face horrific waits to get seen. I mean, myself, I'm still on the waiting list to be seen by an NHS gender clinic. I've been waiting for 2 years, 5 months, and there's still no sign of my first appointment. and yet the NHS say that you shouldn't wait more than 18 weeks. Yeah, it's been 2 years, 5 months so far, and I still don't know. I know people who've waited 4 years to get a first appointment, and then you don't get any treatment, then you just get assessed. So I've been fortunate enough. I was able to afford to go down the private route, so I paid privately. So that's why I've been on cross-sex hormone treatment for 2 years, 3 months, something like that now. So
discrimination, isn't it?
Oh, it is totally. But trans kids, it's even longer, and it's awful. And when you actually see and get to know trans kids, and you see how they are before, and they're so withdrawn, and say so many are suicidal. I mean, it's awful. It really is awful, the pain that they go through, and so many of them don't have supportive parents either, and that makes a huge difference if they get supportive parents. So it's a really, really tough journey for trans kids. And so,
do you do any work with kids at all, or are you doing any work with kids?
I haven't yet, although I've just recently, I have just been given some support. Somebody contacted me for some support for their 14-year-old grandson who's trans. And so I've got a very good friend who's got a trans daughter. And so I am doing some work with them. We are in talks about setting something up, but nothing's concrete yet. So there's something in the pipeline, but I can't really say yet because it's nothing concrete yet. But
mermaids,
mermaids are amazing. They're a brilliant charity. Absolutely love them. Yeah, they are brilliant. So yeah, I want to do some work with them as well. But I was able to signpost this lady to both mermaids and to my friend who was I know she's going to give her a lot of help. It's going to be absolutely brilliant.
Making those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you see them actually, when their gender is actually being affirmed and they're able to be themselves and live as they want, they blossom. They're great. They just come out of their shells and they're just happy children. And you just know. And things somebody said to me, who's like, this is a friend of mine he was certainly somebody who was very slow to accept me, and I still don't know whether he does fully accept me for who I really am. And he was misgendering me for a long time, so I know where he's coming from. And he was like, oh no, well they can't possibly know, and they shouldn't be allowed treatment until they're 18. And so I just said to him, well, he says gender, and I said, well, when did you know you were a boy? Bet you knew a lot sooner than 18, didn't you? And you do, and it's just like how you know whether you're left or right-handed. It's just whatever feels right to you, and you can't force somebody. Like if you're right-handed, you can't force someone to be left-handed. It doesn't feel right.
No,
you can train them to try and write like that, but it still doesn't feel right.
To be in that box, but it always feels awkward and not.
Does. And when you allow them to be themselves, then that you see them flourish, and that's what it's about.
I think that's a whole other area, isn't there? There's a lot of misconception,
completely
misperceptions. I don't know if I say misconception and misperception. Anyway, one of those, both of those, about what.
But as it is for trans children, they don't get cross-sex hormones before puberty anyway. And so what basically all they do is they just get counselling earlier on, and then as they get towards puberty, then they just, if they're lucky, then they get puberty blockers basically, so hormone blockers, just to delay the onset of puberty, just to give them more time to make their mind up. But usually they know anyway from an earlier age. And so it just sort of prolongs the agony, really. But if you're talking about prolonging it to 18, puberty is a lot earlier than 18. So imagine delaying it all the way to then. And I mean, it's just be horrendous. Well, you wouldn't. I mean, what they're suggesting is not delaying it, just allowing them to go through puberty in the wrong gender, wait until 18. So they've got all this agony, they've got all this going. It's a trouble time anyway for them. It'd make it even worse. I mean, basically, if this act goes through, more children will die. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So this act has got to be stopped.
Again, yes, this
got to be stopped.
This is so. This is not something that we can just cast a blind eye over. I don't think
it's not at all. So that's why I'm just so passionate about it and trying to sort of get people to help them. We need, because things that trans people they reckon we're only about sort of 1% of the UK population, but that's still quite a lot. It's still quite a lot. But because we are such a small minority, we're never going to be able to make a big noise and get big mass protests as you would for some other causes. And so that's why we need the help of our cisgender friends. We really do. And so you can really, really help us when we need your help. This is our time. This is our time of need. And I'm appealing for help.
For allies, cisgender and other LGBTQ people, what are the things that we can do? So we've talked about writing to our MPs.
Yep, that's a big thing that would really help.
And I'll make sure that some kind of guidance is given in the show notes for them to put that with your help.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's a blog where I've actually written I've actually published the letter that I wrote to my MP, which could, anybody can copy that, no problem at all. And there's also a link on there to say how they can actually find the email address of their MP as well, to make it really easy. And so even if they don't know who their MP is, they just put in their postcode, they can find it, they can get it. Dead easy.
Brilliant.
Dead easy.
Brilliant.
So you can do it. So writing to MP, very, very important.
Number one that we must do.
If there's any rallies going on or anything, then go along and support those. Obviously, respect if there's still social distancing at the time of those that happened. Obviously, respect that, but they are all very mindful of that, and just being supportive when they hear any transphobic remarks going on, anybody attacking a trans person, just stand up for them, because we can't always. I mean, there was a brilliant instance actually that happened to me a while ago. It was this is way before the coronavirus hit the UK, and I was at an event. It was a black tie event, and I was there. There was quite a few other people there who knew me, and there was two gentlemen having a chat across the other side of the room, and one of them pointed me out and said, and who was quite anti-trans, and said, "Oh, you see that woman over there? That used to be Martin Neeves. I don't get it myself," and was quite disparaging. But luckily, the person he was talking to had the benefit of watching quite a lot of my vlogs, and so he'd actually been educated about trans issues just from watching my videos. And he said, "Well, actually, there's a lot more to it than you think." And he actually then educated him, and it was brilliant. And I wasn't involved in that at all, and I only found out about this after the event. But that's what a true ally does. They stand up. So don't just let it go. Do stand up for us, and just to say, look, we're just ordinary people. That's the message.
Yes, and you're right. Even if we're not in the room, and the same goes for gay, bi, non-binary, whatever, in the LGBTQ plus community and beyond, of course. I think it's like having a voice for us and standing up for us, and also getting enough awareness and understanding, I think, to be able to support us, in the best way. I think it's quite important too.
I think so.
Talking to us and listening to stories and
100% stories. I mean, when I do my trans awareness training, when I tell my story, it's the most powerful part of that training, because it
Yeah.
takes you on a journey and you learn a lot in that process.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's interesting to people and entertaining as well. So I like to put a bit of humor
Yeah.
in, quite a lot of humor when I do it. And I think that is so important, definitely. And if in the workplace, I think, have trans awareness training at work. It should be compulsory. It shouldn't be just something that, I mean, quite often I get invited along to places of work where they'll just come along and I'll just do, say, a lunch and learn session, which is just an hour-long session where I tell my story and do a Q&A session and then give top tips on how to be a trans ally and do that sort of stuff. But it's usually voluntary for people to turn up, but the people that turn up are the people who are already on side anyway, and
Right. Yeah.
it serves purpose in terms that it furthers their education on the subject, but it doesn't actually change anybody's mind. Whereas where it needs to be compulsory, all staff need to go through this, and it's better to actually go through. I mean, I do actually, rather than just a lunch and learn session, I do a sort of 3 hour, 2.5 to 3 hour training session
Yeah.
where I go into it in much more detail and go through all different steps and definitions and all
Yeah.
that as well. And I think that should be something that should be compulsory for, not trying to give it the hard sell for my services, but it should be compulsory for all staff, and that's, if they did that, then that's when companies can say that they're fully trans inclusive, not just sort of ticking a box just to say, oh yes, we had someone come in just to entertain us for an hour, and we've done that, put that away, we've done that.
Yeah. There's a lot of box ticking goes on with all sorts of training. It's about hearts and minds, it's about attitudes, isn't it? And it's also challenging beliefs.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And I think that's where, the power of the allies, I think particularly, is we can't do it without them. No way can we do it just on ourselves, to ourselves, for ourselves.
Allies are vital. They
Yeah.
really are. Absolutely. No.
Yeah. So you do the corporate, private sector training sessions.
Yeah.
Around trans inclusivity, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and public speaking, any association, basically any organisation who'd like to hear from me, really. Yeah. So just to sort of get that message across and tell it in a positive way. And I mean, we've actually touched on and talked about quite a few heavier sides to it, which I don't always do, but I think it was very important to do that in this case. But I like to entertain people, because I think it is important.
You want to kind of like get them in a place where they're open to hear.
I mean, when I do my training sessions and my public speaking, and I do a Q&A session, I always say to people, people can ask me anything, and it's a really safe space. So I said, even if it's a question that would be inappropriate to ask another trans person, I don't mind. I will answer anything, but I'll answer the question. But then if it is inappropriate, then I'll tell you that it would be inappropriate to ask someone else. But I just create a safe space so they can ask me anything, because often they've got burning questions they might want to ask, but they'd be too afraid to ask a trans friend or colleague. So, but it's important for people to know these things. So that's why I'm just a bit of an open book, really.
Helping, and it's helping, like you say, that wider, the ripple effect of the people they don't feel they can ask will be helped by you answering.
And I always ask people afterwards and say, well, I can only educate a certain number of people. And what would be really helpful would be if they can then go and tell others, even if it's just one other person, but more if possible, but even if it's just one other person, just tell them what they learned today, then that helps to spread the word as well. So maybe that's something that your listeners and viewers can do. That would be great.
Yes, that's action number 4.
Yeah. So share this blog.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, Katie, it's been really a great pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And helping us all to get a much better insight into what needs to be done, but also, like you say, what's your motto or your strap line for Cool to be Trans?
I'm a woman on a mission,
Yeah,
but
you're a woman on a
not just any woman and not just any mission.
Yeah, you're absolutely doing some incredible work, and it's
Oh, thank
really
you.
inspiring. And yeah, thank you for all that you do.
Oh, thanks. That's very nice of you to say. Well, thanks for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.
Good. And yeah, all the things we've talked about will be in the show notes, so they will know where to get in touch with you.
Fantastic.
And we'll put your photography link in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think also lots of people in the LGBTQ plus community like to work with other people, other businesses as well.
Yeah. So something I need to sort of do a bit more promoting, really. I think particularly with things like weddings, like LGBTQ plus weddings, where it's a very personal thing, and they know that if they book a photographer, then they don't always know whether they're going to be supportive or not. Whereas at least when they book me, they know that I will be. So yeah, so it's something that I ought to maybe sort of I haven't really promoted that side of it at all. I've just been focusing on cool to be trans. I've been doing that.
your like exciting mission.
I am. I'm so excited about it. I think you can probably tell.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna say goodbye to everybody now, and yeah, thank you, Katie.
Oh, fantastic! Thanks ever so much, Sarah.